The first thing to come back wasn't a thought. It was a taste. A dead chemical flavor on the back of my tongue, like licking a battery that had been forgotten for a century. Then came the cold, a deep cellular chill. My eyelids were fused shut with a sticky residue. I fought them open, grit by grit, and the world bloomed into a painful white. A woman's face swam into focus above me. She was backlit by a light panel, giving her a halo she hadn't earned. Her features were sharp, intelligent, framed by dark hair pulled back in a severe, functional knot. There was a professional calm in her eyes, but I could see the cracks in it. A high-frequency exhaustion vibrated just beneath the surface, the kind you see in an engineer during the final week of a Death March product launch. She was running on fumes. An asset then, a valuable one, but manageable. "Mr. Ford," she said. Her voice was steady but quiet, like she was afraid a loud noise might shatter me. "Damon, can you hear me?" I tried to answer, but my throat was a desert. All that came out was a dry, rasping crackle. I was lying in what felt like a shallow, contoured basin, slick with a cool, odorless gel. Wires, fine as hair, were being retracted from my arms and temples by automated silver arms. A corporate job. High-end. My last transaction had been a good one, at least. "Don't try to speak just yet," the woman said, her eyes fixed on a transparent data slate that hovered beside her head, projecting a cascade of my own vital signs in glowing blue script. "Your name is Damon Ford. You were placed in cryopreservation in the year 2024. The date today." She paused, and I saw a flash in her composure, a micro-tremor in her hand as she steadied the slate. It was the first sign of a crack in her pitch. "The date today is May 4th, 2222. The numbers didn't land with an emotional thud. They landed like a bad earnings report. 198 years, an entire portfolio of assets gone, a network of contacts, all dust. My lawyers, my brokers, my offshore accounts, all erased by the simple, brutal accumulation of time. It was an inconvenience of a colossal, almost beautiful scale. She must have seen the calculation in my eyes, not the shock she was expecting. She leaned closer, forcing a softer, more rehearsed tone. "My name is Dr. Rachel Linwood. I'm the chief biologist of Sanctuary 1. You are safe. You are home." Home. A word people use to sell you something you don't need. Sanctuary 1. I managed to rasp, the words feeling alien in my mouth. My own voice sounded younger than I remembered. The benefits package of being biologically 37 forever. "The last bastion of human civilization," she said, the line delivered with practiced gravity. "The world you knew, it fell. Not with a bang, but a long, slow collapse. War, ecological failure, disease, the old story. By the time it was over, the air itself was toxic. Most of humanity was lost. Some survived on the surface," she continued, her eyes drifting towards a thick, armored viewport on the far wall. "But the toxicity changed them. They are modified, twisted by the world that killed their ancestors. We, the pure, have survived down here, in sealed, self-sustaining environments like this one." I catalogued the terms. Sanctuary, a holding company. Modified, a rival product line, likely defective. Pure, the branding for her own faction. It was all just a sales pitch, dressed up in the language of survival. "For generations we've been losing ground," Rachel said, her voice finally cracking with something genuine. The exhaustion I'd spotted earlier bled into raw, undisguised desperation. "Our gene pool is too shallow. We're suffering from genomic collapse syndrome. A progressive decay. We're dying out, Damon. We needed a reset. A clean, untainted genome from before the fall. We searched for decades, and then we found you." She looked at me then, and the rehearsed calm was gone. In its place was a raw, primal hope, the kind of look a mark gets right before they sign on the dotted line, convinced you're about to save their life. "Your DNA is the key," she whispered. "We call it the Salvation Project. With your genetic blueprint, we can create a serum. A cure that can repair our damaged code and maybe one day even reverse the mutations on the surface. You aren't just a man, Mr. Ford. You are the future of the human race." I met her eyes. The future of the human race, the ultimate startup. Capital, one vial of my own blood. My role, founder, CEO, and sole indispensable asset. And this woman, this brilliant, desperate doctor, Rachel Linwood, with the weight of her entire world crushing her. She was my new lead engineer. She would build whatever I told her to. I just had to make her believe it was her idea. I gave her my best smile, the one I save for closing a deal. "Well, Doctor," I said, my voice slowly returning, "it sounds like we have a lot of work to do." A week. They gave me a week to let my body remember it was alive. A week of tasteless nutrient paste, physical assessments and data dumps delivered by Rachel with the tireless efficiency of a machine. She fed me the history of the last 2 centuries like it was a corporate prospectus, all charts and grim statistics. She was building my reality for me, brick by brick, and I let her. A good con man knows that the most effective lies are the ones the mark helps build themselves. My days were spent in a pristine white chamber that they called my quarters, but felt more like a high-end holding cell. The air, recycled 1,000,000 times over, had a flat, metallic quality, scrubbed clean of any scent, any life. The silence was absolute, a manufactured void. The few other pures I saw in the corridors moved with a frictionless purpose, their faces impassive, their eyes fixed forward. It wasn't a society, it was a server farm, and these people were just data packets moving from one node to another. My takeover bid was looking more necessary by the hour. On the 8th day, Rachel came for me. "You're acclimating well," she said, her eyes on her hovering data slate, never on me. "Your system shows minimal cryodegradation. It's time you saw what we're fighting for, and what we're fighting against." We walked. The corridors of Sanctuary 1 were less built than they were extruded, seamless tubes of a pale, pearlescent alloy that absorbed sound. We passed labs sealed behind thick panes of armored glass, where figures in white moved like ghosts tending to racks of glowing flora. Hydroponics, the company's food supply. We passed residential blocks where the doorways were all identical, no names, just unit designations. No personalization, no identity. An efficient system, I had to admit, but one without a soul. A market ripe for disruption. Finally, we reached a heavy, circular door like a bank vault's. It opened, revealing a darkened chamber. The far wall wasn't a wall at all. It was a single, immense sheet of armored polycrystal, a viewport looking out into hell. Rachel gestured towards it. The observatory. I stepped forward, my soft-soled boots making no sound on the grated metal floor. And I saw the surface. The world I'd once owned. It was a landscape bleached of its colour, as if the sun had forgotten how to shine and left only a weak grey smear in the sky. The atmosphere itself was a visible thing, a churning, oily haze the colour of a day-old bruise. Through it I could see the skeletal remains of 21st century ambition, the jagged stumps of skyscrapers, ribs of dead highways reaching for nothing. "The toxicity," Rachel said quietly from behind me. "It's not just in the air, it's in the soil, the water, everything." My eyes snagged on movement below. A group of figures, maybe a dozen of them, were picking their way through the ruins. The modified. They weren't the shambling monsters I'd half expected. They were lean, wiry. They flowed over the rubble in a way that wasn't quite natural, their movements linked, coordinated, without any visible signal. It was like watching a flock of birds or a school of fish, a collective consciousness rippling through them. As I focused on them, on their eerie, silent unison, it began. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling. A low-grade vibration that started in the soles of my boots and climbed the ladder of my bones. A deep, internal thrumming settled in my jaw. The metallic taste from my awakening was back, sharp and acidic on my tongue. The pressure built behind my eyes, a slow, piercing headache that felt like a drill bit searching for the center of my brain. It was invasive, a signal broadcast on a frequency my body was never meant to receive, and it felt like my own skeleton was trying to harmonize with something vast and terrible. I gritted my teeth, fighting the nausea. "What is that?" I forced out. Rachel looked at me with an expression of clinical sympathy. She wasn't feeling it. Not a flicker. "That's what the surface tribes call the bone song," she said, her tone perfectly level. "Anomalous low-frequency resonance. We've studied it for decades. It seems to be a quirk of their mutated biology, a form of infrasonic communication. You're one of the few pures who is sensitive to it. We believe it's a marker of your pristine nervous system." She framed it as a feature, not a bug. A brilliant bit of spin. But her explanation was too clean, too pat. This wasn't communication. It was a physical assault. More than that, it was a system, a back-channel conversation happening right in front of me, in a language that bypassed words and went straight for the nervous system, a language I was violently excluded from. The headache sharpened, the thrumming intensified. The world outside the viewport, the world they wanted me to save, was humming with a power I couldn't access, couldn't analyze, and couldn't control. A genuine, unfamiliar fear began to curdle in my gut. It wasn't the fear of death, it was the terror of being irrelevant. The smartest man in the room, suddenly deaf to the only conversation that mattered. The memory of that grating hum in my bones clung to me for days. It was a background radiation in my thoughts. I played the part Rachel had cast for me, the cooperative savior, the priceless relic, eager to help. I asked the right questions, nodded at her technical briefings, and spent my time learning the architecture of her lie. Every system has vulnerabilities. You just have to find the user interface. My opportunity came during what she called the deep genomic mapping. It was the beginning of the real work, she'd explained. The process of translating my 21st century biology into a language her systems could use to engineer the cure. I was back in a diagnostic cradle, this one colder and more complex than the revival pod. A semi-viscous conductive fluid filled the basin around me, chilling me to the marrow. Above me, a halo of projectors cast a complex, three-dimensional honeycomb of light onto my body, reading me layer by layer. The raw data streamed in front of Rachel on her hovering slate, a waterfall of glowing glyphs and cascading code. She stood beside me, absorbed, a high priestess interpreting the sacred texts. To her, this was salvation. To me, it was due diligence. My old world ran on data, trillions of transactions a second, algorithms sniffing out microsecond advantages in market fluctuations. I may not have understood the specific science scrolling past Rachel's face, but I knew the rhythm of clean code. I knew the smooth, uninterrupted flow of a secure data stream. For 20 minutes, I watched the waterfall, letting its cadence lull me, tracking its perfect metronomic pulse. And then I saw it. It wasn't a glitch. A glitch is messy, chaotic. This was precise. For a single imperceptible instant, the data stream stuttered. The waterfall of code froze, and a paper-thin sliver of it, a block related to my neural chemistry, I noted, was shunted sideways, vanishing through what looked like a sub-protocol before the mainstream resumed its perfect flow. It was a hiccup, a skipped beat. It was the digital equivalent of a magician palming a card. Fast, clean, and designed to be missed. I kept my voice casual. "What was that?" Rachel didn't look up from the slate. Her focus was absolute. "What was what?" "The feed. It just rerouted a data packet." She paused. Her fingers stopped moving over the holographic interface. She tilted her head, affecting a look of professional curiosity, and replayed the last 10 seconds of the scan. She froze it on the exact frame of the anomaly. "Ah, that," she said, her voice a smooth blend of reassurance and condescension. "It's a legacy handshake protocol. Your genome is encrypted with archaic 21st century protein markers. Our system has to build a custom decryption key in real time. Occasionally, there's a fractional delay as the primary system queries a secondary library for the correct syntax. It's a relic of dealing with your primitive, forgive me, original coding. Nothing to worry about. She swiped the screen and the data began flowing again. The explanation was flawless. It was technical, logical, and it used my own antiquity as the reason for the issue. It was perfect. And that's how I knew she was lying. I've spent a lifetime building and dismantling lies. I know their anatomy. A real, spontaneous explanation has rough edges. It has pauses, moments of uncertainty. Rachel's explanation had none. It was polished to a mirror sheen. It was a pre-written script, an answer she had prepared long before I ever thought to ask the question. She didn't just have an answer, she had it loaded and waiting. I let out a slow breath, the conductive gel around me suddenly feeling like quicksand. The ice-cold seed of suspicion I'd felt at the observatory, the professional paranoia that had kept me alive for decades, bloomed in my chest. I wasn't her partner. I wasn't her savior. The Salvation Project was a shell company, and Rachel Linwood was hiding assets from her sole investor. I wasn't the CEO of humanity's future. I was the mine, and she was quietly stripping me for parts. For the next 2 weeks, I was the model asset. I absorbed her briefings on genomic sequencing. I submitted to every invasive scan, and I offered thoughtful, strategic input on the theoretical distribution of the serum. I learned the layout of Sanctuary 1, the shift patterns of the security patrols they called executors, and the subtle hierarchies within the technocracy. Most importantly, I learned their network. Rachel, in her hubris, had granted me high-level clearance. She thought it would make me feel invested. It was a fatal mistake. Late during the sleep cycle, when the station ran on a skeleton crew, I sat at the terminal in my quarters. Under the guise of studying pre-collapse atmospheric models, a plausible bit of research for my role, I dove into the Sanctuary's deep archives. I wasn't looking for science. I was looking for grit in the gears. I was looking for the unauthorized, the unexplained, the loose threads that every tidy system tries to hide. I found him in the security logs. His name wasn't there, of course. He was just a ghost, a recurring anomaly tied to a string of minor but baffling incidents. A case of pure-grade medical opiates vanishing from a locked dispensary. A private message between 2 council members intercepted and leaked, causing a minor political crisis. In every case, the investigation hit a dead end, concluding with a note on untraceable network breaches. The ghost had a name in the margins of one frustrated executor's report, a name he'd likely overheard from a black market informant, Jack. A broker, the report speculated. An independent operator who moved information and goods between the sanctuary, the surface, and the dead spaces in between. He was the system's primary vulnerability. He was my new user interface. Getting to him was a risk. The network was a panopticon, constantly watching. But a system that watches for everything is a system that can be distracted. I found a dusty corner of the network. A server hosting geological surveys from the first decade of the sanctuary's existence. I composed a new survey file, a meaningless string of seismic data. Buried deep inside its metadata, I embedded my message, an encrypted packet that would only be visible to a user actively scanning for such things. It was a baited hook cast into a dark ocean. The message was simple, transactional. Asset requires external consultant. Valuable consideration. Prove access. I sent the file to the archive and wiped the terminal's cache. Then I waited. For 3 days, nothing. I continued my performance with Rachel. Then, on the 4th night, I woke from a shallow sleep with a certainty I couldn't explain. I went to my terminal and opened a standard dietary manifest. Tucked between the nutrient paste percentages and the vitamin supplements was a new line of text, written in a stark, simple font. Access proven. Channel 17, midday, one-time use. The next midday I opened the channel. It was a raw, unadorned text interface, a black screen with a single blinking cursor. There was no greeting. I typed, "I require raw, untainted atmospheric and seismic data from 3 distinct surface locations, quadrants specified in attachment. Data must be sourced independently. No sanctuary hardware, no sanctuary software." The reply was instantaneous. Difficult, high risk, expensive. Payment is not an issue. A pause. I could almost feel him calculating, weighing the risk against the reward. Then the cursor blinked again. Consideration: 6 standard vials of O-negative synthetic hemoglobin, 100 grams of weapons-grade plastex, 12 EP7 micro-batteries, fully charged. Specific, practical. Things a man living in the grey zones would need. Things I could acquire by submitting falsified requisitions, citing experimental lab requirements for the Salvation Project. He knew exactly what I had access to. He'd done his homework. This was a predator who understood the marketplace. I felt a sliver of professional respect. Agreed. Provide delivery protocol. Negative. I will retrieve from a location of my choosing. You will leave the package. If it is there, you will get your data. If it is a trap, I will be gone. He was dictating the terms. He was in control. Acceptable, I typed. The final reply came a second later. Transaction pending. The channel closed. The screen went blank. The waiting was a new kind of hell. It wasn't the anxious, high-stakes waiting of a market on the verge of a crash. This was a dull, grinding erosion. With every passing day, the bone song grew louder in my head. What had been a headache was now a low-grade migraine, a constant abrasive pressure that made complex thought feel like wading through mud. The pain was a liability. It was a persistent, debilitating defect in my primary asset, my mind. Rachel's so-called medical team offered solutions, analgesics that dulled my thoughts along with the pain, neural dampeners that left me feeling disassociated and slow. Useless. My data from Jack was still pending. My own plan was stalled. I was an apex predator trapped in a cage with a high-frequency alarm ringing inside my own skull. Action was required. I opened the one-time channel to Jack again, a breach of our agreed-upon protocol. I didn't care. My previous request is on hold. New contract, immediate priority. The reply was swift, laced with digital annoyance. The broker sets the terms. The headaches, from the surface hum. They are compromising my ability to procure your payment. Solve this problem for me. It was a confession of weakness, a move I would have never made in my old life. But this wasn't my old life. Here, a temporary vulnerability could be leveraged to secure a long-term advantage. There was a long pause. Jack was recalibrating my value, factoring in this new data point. I was a fragile client with access. He could charge more. This is not a transaction of goods. This is a transaction of flesh, higher risk, new price. Name it. To be determined, based on the solution. The reply felt smug. A meeting. 3 days, the Rust Cathedral in Sector Gamma 7. Come alone. Wait for the bruise to thin. The bruise, the toxic mist. Jack was using the language of the surface tribes. He was a chameleon, perfectly adapted to his environment. 3 days later, I was standing in a filtration alcove on the edge of the sanctuary's perimeter, a grey, featureless utility airlock that stank of ozone and recycled water. I had a rebreather mask covering the lower half of my face and a borrowed grey poncho that did little to hide the fact that I was an alien here. When the light above the door shifted from red to amber, I pushed it open and stepped into the Rust Cathedral. It was the ruin of a pre-collapse power plant. 4 immense cooling towers clawed at the grey sky, their sides weeping streaks of rust the colour of dried blood. Inside the main turbine hall, light struggled through grime-caked skylights hundreds of feet up, illuminating dust motes that danced like ghosts in the gloom. This was Jack's territory, a place of forgotten power and present decay. I didn't see him. I saw a figure emerge from the shadows cast by a dead turbine. It wasn't Jack. This man was old, his skin the texture of cracked leather, his back stooped. He wore layers of patched hides and woven fibers, and he leaned on a staff of gnarled, pale wood. It was his eyes that held me. They were piercingly clear, ancient and sharp, and they missed nothing. "You are the untuned man," the old man said. His voice was a dry whisper, like stones rubbing together. My condescension rose like bile. This was Jack's solution. A witch doctor. I'd come seeking a neurosurgeon, and he'd sent me a nomadic mystic. I kept my tone transactional. "I was told you could help with a physical ailment." The old man shuffled closer. Ivor. Jack had supplied the name. He was a mender, a healer for the tribes. He ignored my words and studied my face, his gaze analytical in a way that had nothing to do with science. "Your song is loud," he murmured, more to himself than to me. He reached out a gnarled hand and gently touched his fingertips to my jaw, right over the joint where the thrumming was most intense. His touch was cool and dry. Not a sickness, an imbalance. The world sings its song, and your bones are trying to answer, but you do not know the words. He was a poet. How utterly useless. "Can you fix it?" Ivor's eyes never left mine. "To fix is to break something else. I can restore harmony, for a time." He pulled a small leather pouch from his belt and tipped its contents into his palm. It was a dark, crumbly substance, a mash of what looked like moss and mineral dust. It smelled of damp earth and something sharp, like ozone after a lightning strike. "Ashen moss," he said, anticipating my question. "Grows only where the sky metal has bled into the earth and clay from the silent riverbeds." He mixed the compound with a few drops of water from a skin, working it into a thick, grey paste. "Behind the ears, where the skull listens." I felt a surge of indignation. I was Damon Ford. I had liquidated companies, outmaneuvered federal investigators, and built an empire on the subtle art of human weakness. Now I was standing in a ruin, about to smear mud on my head on the advice of a superstitious primitive. But the drill bit behind my eyes was relentless, and logic dictated I see this transaction through. Hesitantly, I took a small amount of the grey paste. It was cool to the touch. I applied it to the skin behind my ears. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the world fell away. It wasn't a gradual fading. It was a switch being thrown. The pressure behind my eyes vanished. The low, invasive thrum that had been the soundtrack to my new life simply stopped. My jaw unclamped. The metallic taste on my tongue was gone. My own skeleton, which had felt like a resonant instrument for an alien orchestra, was suddenly quiet. It was mine again. The silence was not peaceful. It was a profound and terrifying void. It was the sudden, deafening absence of a god I hadn't known I was hearing. In that empty moment, the truth slammed into me. This wasn't a biological quirk. It wasn't a spiritual communion. It wasn't a sickness. It was a broadcast, an external, artificial, technological broadcast. I must have staggered because Ivor's hand steadied my arm. I looked at him, my condescension vaporized, replaced by a searing dread. His ancient eyes were full of something that looked like pity. "Sometimes," he whispered, his voice resonating in the sudden stillness. "The quiet is the most important part of the song." The walk back to the sanctuary perimeter was a pilgrimage through a new world. The silence Ivor had given me was a shield. It scrubbed the landscape clean, revealing it for what it was. A ruin, silent and dead, not humming with some secret life. I could hear the wind moving through the skeletal frames of the dead towers, a low, mournful sigh. I could hear the grit of my own boots on the rust-stained concrete. These were honest sounds. They were real. The poultice's effect lasted for 1 hour and 14 minutes. I timed it. I was nearing the filtration alcove, the grey, featureless slab of the sanctuary wall looming in the toxic haze, when the silence broke. It didn't fade in. It snapped on, an activation. The signal reasserted its dominance over my biology with the indifferent flick of a switch. The pressure slammed back into place behind my eyes. The metallic tang flooded my mouth. The deep, invasive thrum vibrated up through my bones. But it was different now. Before, it was an annoyance, a physical symptom. Now, I felt its intelligence. It was no longer just a hum. It was a voice, speaking a language I couldn't understand. And its very presence was a declaration of ownership. It was the sound of my own cage. The rest of the atmospheric data Jack had been procuring for me was now useless. A waste of assets. A man who suspects his house is bugged doesn't start by analysing the air quality in the garden. He tears the walls apart looking for the microphone. Back in the silence of my quarters, I sat at my terminal, the thrum in my skull making the glowing screen swim. Rachel's deception, her pilfering of my genetic code, was now a triviality. It was a squabble over petty cash during a hostile corporate takeover by a cosmic entity. I had been focused on seizing control of the company, only to find out the entire office building was slated for demolition by a power that didn't even know I was inside. The bone song was the key. Not a key to a cure, but a key to the prison. Who was broadcasting it? And why? I opened the channel. The black screen and its blinking cursor felt like an oracle now. I didn't wait for Jack to initiate. Priority 1, new contract, previous transaction void. The reply was almost instant. The broker is not accustomed to his clients dictating terms. The terms have changed because the nature of the product has changed. I no longer require environmental data. I require the point of origin for the anomalous low-frequency resonance. The bone song. Find the broadcaster. The cursor blinked, once per second, a slow, mocking heartbeat. Jack was thinking. He was a creature of pure pragmatism, and I had just handed him a piece of information that radically altered his entire understanding of the world. He was connecting the dots. My debilitating headaches, my desperate need for a modified mystic, my sudden, obsessive pivot. He knew this wasn't about a cure anymore. This was bigger, more dangerous, more profitable. Finally, the cursor moved. This is not data retrieval. This is an intelligence operation against an unknown, possibly non-human actor. The risk is incalculable. The price will reflect that. This was the moment. The point of no return. I had to offer him something he couldn't refuse. Something that made tangling with a potential god worth his while. Price, complete source code and hardware schematics for Sanctuary 1's water reclamation and atmospheric filtration systems, I typed. The codes were life. The ability to poison the Sanctuary's water or shut down its air was the ultimate leverage. It was the key to the kingdom, and I was giving it away to a ghost for a chance to identify my jailer. The pause this time was shorter. It was the sound of a predator recognizing the scent of blood. Consideration accepted. This is no longer a simple transaction. This is Project Rosetta. I will require an advance. The primary filtration algorithms, 24 hours from now on, we communicate only when I initiate. Expect my next transmission when I have something to sell. The channel went dead. The screen was black. Project Rosetta. He'd given our madness a name. The hum in my bones seemed to intensify, a low, mocking laugh. I had just sold out the last bastion of humanity, trading their lives for a single, terrifying answer. It was the most honest transaction I'd made in 198 years. The silence was a drug, and I was an addict. I'd bartered my way into 2 more pouches of Ivor's ashen moss, trading away medical supplies I was sure Rachel would eventually notice were missing. Each application was a dose of precious sanity. For an hour, sometimes 2 if I was lucky, the monstrous hum in my bones would cease and I could think. I could plot. In those quiet interludes, I felt like Damon Ford again, a predator, a strategist. But when the signal inevitably snapped back on, the return was more brutal every time. The silence made the noise unbearable. It was the sound of my prison bars vibrating, reminding me they were always there. The waiting stretched into weeks. My performance for Rachel was becoming strained. She saw my distraction, my frayed nerves, but she misread the cause. She attributed it to cryolag, to the psychological stress of my role. She prescribed sedatives, which I palmed and later destroyed. Her misdiagnosis was my only advantage. She was trying to treat a symptom while I was hunting for the disease. Then, during a mid-cycle when the sanctuary was at its quietest, my terminal, dark and dormant, flickered to life. The black screen and the blinking cursor appeared. Channel 17. This time there was no text, just a single encrypted data packet labeled Rosetta. My hands felt unsteady as I navigated the interface. I built a temporary, isolated sandbox in the terminal's memory, a digital quarantine, and downloaded the file. It wasn't a report. It was a triptych of raw, irrefutable truth. The first panel was a visual graph, elegant in its horror. 2 sine waves superimposed. One, labeled anomalous low-frequency resonance, was a precise mapping of the bone song's frequency and amplitude over the last month. The second, labeled Atmos Tox, tracked the density of the surface toxicity. They were identical. They were a perfect one-to-one mirror. When the hum intensified, the toxic bruise on the sky darkened. When it weakened, the air cleared. Natural systems don't move in perfect unison. Engineered systems do. The second panel was raw telemetry. Salvaged from a pre-collapse deep-range listening post, Jack must have risked his life to access. A log of objects in high terrestrial orbit. Most were catalogued wreckage, dead satellites from my century, but 3 were different. They were flagged as non-terrestrial. Their energy signatures actively masked, bleeding only a faint, ghostly resonance. The third panel was the killing blow. Jack had isolated the energy signature from one of the unknown orbital objects and laid it directly over his own recording of the bone song. They were the same. A perfect match. The signal rained down from space, a broadcast from an unknown, unseen, and advanced intelligence. I leaned back from the terminal, the truth settling. Every piece of the world's sickness snapped into place as a symptom of a managed system. The toxicity functioned as a planetary containment field. The bone song served as a mass control signal, and the endless war between the pure and the modified revealed itself for what it was: a feature, a deliberately maintained ecosystem designed to produce conflict. My terminal blinked. A line of text appeared beneath the data. Project Rosetta complete. The data speaks for itself. I typed my reply. The consideration is yours. Send protocol. The cursor blinked, but no reply came. A full minute passed. The hum in my skull felt like it was laughing at me. Then new text materialized. The transaction as agreed upon is hereby void. Ice flowed into my veins. The value of the discovered asset far exceeds the stipulated payment. A contract entered into under false pretenses, namely the true scale of the operation, is invalid. This is a fundamental principle of market law. He was using my own logic against me. This information is no longer a deliverable. It is now an independent asset. I am its sole proprietor. It is for sale. The Sanctuary Council will pay a kingdom to know why their world is a prison. Rival factions may pay more to ensure they never find out. You, Mr. Shaw, are welcome to enter a bid. He hadn't just solved the mystery. He'd stolen it from me. He'd taken the single most valuable truth in human history and put it on the open market. I had commissioned a piece of research, and in doing so, had created my single greatest competitor. The final line of text burned itself onto the screen. The auction is now open. The channel went dead. I was alone in my room, with the roar of a monstrous alien signal in my bones and the dawning horror that the truth was no longer mine to control. Rage is a poor catalyst for strategic thinking. Panic is worse. For 2 days I let them both fester. Jack had outmaneuvered me on a cosmic scale, but his game was long. Mine had to be short. I couldn't fight the farmer, not yet. But I could sure as hell burn down the barn. I found Rachel in her lab. It was the heart of the sanctuary's scientific infrastructure, a cathedral of controlled systems. She stood before a vast, wall-sized bioprinter, its intricate mechanical arms weaving new tissue samples with hypnotic precision. She was in her element, a monarch in her court, and she didn't hear me approach. "The lie has to be exhausting," I said, my voice cutting through the hum of the machinery. She flinched, a sharp, galvanic twitch, and spun around. Her face was a facade calibrated for authority, but it was hastily applied. "Damon, you shouldn't be in here. This is a sterile environment." "We're long past sterile, Rachel," I said, stepping closer. I didn't raise my voice. A predator doesn't need to shout. "The genomic mapping, the so-called legacy handshake protocol. The data packet you shunted sideways. I want to know what was in it. I want to know where you're hiding my assets." She squared her shoulders, her expression hardening into one of clinical condescension. "You're under immense psychological stress. Cryo-reanimation on your timescale is unprecedented. Paranoia is a documented side effect. I was a paranoid, untrusting bastard 198 years ago, Doctor. Time has only refined my technique. You're running a secondary project in parallel with the Salvation Project. You're siphoning my genetic data for a purpose you haven't disclosed to the Council or to me. And whatever it is, it's making you reckless." She opened her mouth to deliver another perfectly calibrated dismissal, but at that exact moment, a sharp, piercing alarm chimed from the data slate floating beside her. A crimson icon flashed on its screen. Her eyes snapped to it, and for a half-second, the mask of the brilliant scientist disintegrated completely. I saw raw, unfiltered terror. She stabbed a finger at the screen, silencing the alarm. "What was that? Another legacy protocol?" Her composure was gone, shattered. "It's nothing," she snapped, her voice thin and brittle. "A system alert. It's handled." "Whose system?" I pressed, stepping into her space, forcing her back against a steel counter. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow. She looked at me, and I saw a cornered animal, all of its escape routes cut off. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Then make me understand." The words tore out of her, a confession ripped from the bedrock of her soul. "My daughter. Her name is Lily. She's 11 years old. She has end-stage genomic collapse. Her DNA it's dissolving. She has weeks, maybe less." The pieces slammed into place, the entire architecture of her grand deception collapsing into one simple, pathetic, human truth. "There is no reunification serum," she continued, the words tumbling over each other in a torrent of long-suppressed honesty. "There never was. The Salvation Project is a lie. I discovered your pod 7 years ago. When I analyzed your dormant genome, I saw it. It wasn't a universal key. It wasn't a cure for our people. It was a perfect one-to-one genetic match, a clean, pristine template with the exact markers needed to overwrite and repair one damaged genome. Hers." She looked up at me, her eyes shimmering with a terrifying, absolute clarity. There was no apology in them. There was only the ferocious, defiant love of a mother willing to sacrifice a species for her child. "I built the entire Salvation Project narrative around you. I convinced the Council to fund the most expensive, high-risk procedure in the Sanctuary's history. All for one little girl." The words echoed in the quiet of the lab, and I felt the final floor of my reality give way. The cosmic horror of the harvesters was a vast philosophical terror. This was different. This was an intimate, soul-crushing humiliation. I had believed myself to be a god reborn, the indispensable savior of mankind, the CEO of a new world. And in one shattering moment, Rachel Linwood had demoted me. I wasn't a savior. I wasn't a king. I wasn't even an asset. I was a tool, a biological solvent, a single personalized dose of medicine for a sick child. The grandest con of my life, the one where I had finally won it all, wasn't even my own. I was just the cheap prop used to distract the audience while the real magician performed her trick. I didn't run. I moved. My mind was a collapsing star, the weight of Rachel's petty, devastating deception pulling everything inward. But beneath it, A colder, sharper imperative was taking shape. The small lie was a distraction. The big lie was everything. I acquired another rebreather and poncho. I found the filtration alcove again. Stepping out of the sanctuary was like stepping out of a tomb into a graveyard. My humiliation had burned away my arrogance. I wasn't looking for a tool anymore. I was looking for a prophet. Jack had mentioned the silent riverbeds in a fragmented note attached to Ivor's file, a place the mender went for his clay. I spent hours navigating the skeletal ruins, using the pre-collapsed city grid I'd memorized from the sanctuary's maps. I found the riverbed where a mighty river had once carved its way through the city. Now, it was a dry, cracked artery of pale, lifeless clay. And there he was. Ivor was on his knees, his back to me, digging methodically in the clay with his gnarled hands. He seemed a part of the landscape, as ancient and weathered as the ruins around him. The bone song felt thicker here, heavier, a pressure wave that pushed against my chest with every breath. I approached, my steps loud in the desolate quiet. He didn't turn. "Shepherd," I said, the word feeling strange and foreign. "The song is a lie." Ivor stopped digging. He slowly wiped the grey clay from his hands onto his leather trousers. He looked over his shoulder, his eyes holding no surprise, only a deep, profound weariness. "A song does not need to be true to be beautiful," he whispered, "or to be useful." "You knew," I said. "You knew it wasn't ours. It has been a long time since anything in this world was truly ours, untuned man." He finally rose, leaning on his staff. He looked smaller than I remembered, fragile against the backdrop of the dead city. "You have seen the note behind the music. Good. Now you are truly listening." I stepped closer, my last shred of composure unraveling. "I've seen it. The signal comes from the sky, the toxicity, the song. They're linked. They're a system. But why? For what purpose? What is the point of all this?" My voice cracked on the last word, a sound of pure, undiluted desperation. Ivor looked at me then, and his expression was one I had never encountered in my life. It wasn't pity. It was a shared sorrow, a welcome to a truth he had been living with for 70 years. "You are a man of sharp edges," he said softly. "You see the parts but not the whole. You see a shepherd, a flock and a song. You think the song is for control. You are not wrong, but you are not right either." He gestured with his staff toward the hazy, bruised sky, towards the unseen broadcasters I now knew were there. "You think the shepherd sings for love of his flock, to guide them and keep them safe. That is a story for children." He met my gaze, and his ancient eyes held the weight of a truth so heavy it had bent his spine. "A farmer does not sing to his wheat. He sings to pass the time as he sharpens the scythe." The word struck me. A farmer. A scythe. The metaphor wasn't a metaphor. It was a literal technical schematic. Jack's data, the orbital platforms, the managed atmospheric toxicity. Rachel's deception, her tiny, desperate struggle over a single stalk of wheat, completely oblivious to the field. The constant war, the engineered mutations, the pain, the hope, the fear. It wasn't a tragedy. It was agriculture, genetic yield, psychic effluence. We weren't a fallen species fighting for survival. We were a crop, cultivated for a harvest by a power that didn't even register our consciousness as anything more than a chemical reaction. The bone song swelled, the hum in my skull climbing in pitch. But it wasn't a signal anymore. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a language. It was just noise. The casual, indifferent, thoughtless hum of a field hand passing the time. The sound of my own, and all of humanity's utter and absolute insignificance. And in that silent, screaming moment of clarity, the last vestiges of Damon Ford, the man who believed he could conquer any system, died and turned to dust. The dead don't stay dead for long, not in a marketplace. For 3 full days I embraced the void. I sat in my room and let the cosmic insignificance wash through me. I let the bone song, the farmer's hum, become the new rhythm of my blood. The horror didn't fade, but it clarified, solidifying from a gaseous existential terror into a hard fact. A fact, like any other, can be leveraged. My ego wasn't dead. It had simply molted, shedding an old, inadequate skin. I couldn't contact Jack through our old channel. He held all the cards. To re-enter the game, I had to flip the table over. I accessed my terminal, but this time I bypassed the Sanctuary's pristine network. I dug deep into the system's oldest protocols and found what I was looking for: access to a pre-collapse emergency broadcast frequency. It was a digital flare, a shout into the dark that anyone with the right equipment could hear. It was loud, crude, and desperate. It was perfect. I broadcast a single, unencrypted sentence. Project Rosetta, Damon Ford proposes a merger. I didn't have to wait long. An hour later, a maintenance panel I had never noticed before slid open in the wall of my quarters, revealing a dark recess. Inside sat a small, featureless data slate. On its screen was a set of coordinates and a time. Nothing else. Getting out was surprisingly easy. The lords of the manor are never watching for a slave who wants to walk back into the fields. I wore the same grey poncho, the same rebreather, and slipped out through the same utility airlock. This time, however, I had a pouch of Ivor's moss behind my ears. I needed the silence. I needed to think. The coordinates led me to the shattered spire of what had once been a corporate headquarters. I climbed 30 flights of emergency stairs. Jack's nest was on the top floor, in what had been the CEO's office. The space was a spider's web of salvaged functionality. Wires snaked across the floor, held down with strips of hardened resin. A dozen mismatched data slates were arranged in a semicircle, displaying surveillance feeds of the surrounding ruins, atmospheric data, and complex energy readings. In the center of it all, sitting in a patched-together chair, was Jack. He was slighter than I imagined, a man made of practical, layered fabrics and unspoken purpose. His face was a calm void, his eyes constantly moving, assessing. "A merger," Jack said without inflection. "A bold move for a man with no assets." "You're mistaken," I replied, stepping into the room, my hands open and away from my body. "I have one asset you'll never have. I'm the anomaly. I am the wild seed in the farmer's crop, and I have you to thank for helping me understand that. Flattery is a worthless currency. This isn't flattery. It's a preamble to a business proposal. You outmaneuvered me. Well played. You took my intelligence, repackaged it, and are preparing to sell it to the highest bidder. A sound, short-term plan." I walked toward the shattered remains of the office's great window, looking down at the grey, dead city. "But what happens after you sell it, Jack? You get a one-time payout. And in exchange, you create chaos. You give the truth to people who can't handle it. The sanctuary will panic. The tribes will see their god revealed as a machine. The entire system that you have so perfectly learned to exploit will collapse into screaming, unproductive anarchy. And then the farmers, annoyed by the noise, might just decide to sterilize the field and start over. Your business will be liquidated, along with everyone else." I turned back to him. "Selling the truth is the single most unprofitable thing you could do with it." A flicker in his eyes. He was listening. He was calculating. "You and I continued, "are the only two people on this planet who understand the rules of the game. We know what the bone song really is. We can predict the thickening of the veil. We are the only ones who can see the farmer's hand. Why would we give that advantage away? Why would we give away the ability to be the only sane men in a global asylum?" "You're proposing a partnership," he said. "I am proposing a cartel," I corrected him. "We don't sell the truth. We hoard it. We leverage it. We use our knowledge of the system to manipulate both sides. We become the shadow brokers who guide the sanctuary's policies. We become the oracles who whisper warnings to the tribes. We can control the flow of resources, of fear, of hope. We stop being scavengers fighting over scraps from the table, and we become the only two rats who know how to get into the pantry." I stepped forward, extending my hand. It was a gesture from another century, a symbol of a contract. "Forget being the broker who sells a secret," I said. "Let's be the gods who know it, kings of the farm, even if we can never kill the farmer." Jack looked at my outstretched hand. He looked out at the dead world he so expertly survived in. His entire philosophy was built on the tangible, the quantifiable, the profitable. He had no ego to get in the way of a superior business model. The logic was sharp and inescapable. Slowly he reached out and shook my hand. His grip was firm, dry, and utterly devoid of warmth. It was a transaction. A new, terrifying company had just been formed. We had become a two-man board meeting for the end of the world. In the dusty ruin of the CEO's office, we sketched out the architecture of our new reality. My voice, freed from the bone song by Ivers Moss, felt strong, confident. I was in my element, outlining a strategy of leveraged information and controlled panic. "We start with the sanctuary's water supply," I was saying, pacing in front of the shattered window. "We use your access to subtly alter the mineral balance, nothing lethal, just enough to trigger their sensors. We create a problem. Then, through a cutout, we provide the solution, attributing it to a rare surface lichen only a specific modified tribe knows how to find. We create a dependency. We become the indispensable consultants to a crisis of our own making. Phase 1. Establish market dominance." Jack sat in his jury-rigged throne, cleaning his energy rifle. He was processing my words, stripping them of their corporate grandeur and reducing them to a pure, pragmatic equation. "The risk is in the transfer of information. Any direct contact—" He trailed off. His head tilted, a subtle, animalistic motion. "Do you feel that?" I stopped pacing. The moss behind my ears was working. My mind was a quiet, orderly boardroom. "I don't feel anything." "No," he said, setting the rifle down. His eyes scanned the room, the dust motes, the whining electronics. The background noise, the song. "It's changing." And then I felt it. Not through my ears or bones, but as a pressure against my skull. Ivor's cure was a shield against the farmer's ambient hum. But this was different. This was a targeted broadcast, a focused beam of pure malice. It wasn't a song, it was the shriek of a feedback loop, a grinding, vibrating nausea that bypassed my hearing and went straight for my brainstem. "What is it?" I gasped, staggering back, one hand clamped to my head. Jack grabbed his rifle, his pragmatism instantly shifting from planning to pure survival. In the far corner of the room, the shadows began to behave strangely. They stopped conforming to the laws of light, instead pulling inward, deepening, congealing. The dust motes in the air ceased their lazy dance and were drawn into a central point, swirling into a vortex of dark, coalescing matter. It didn't flash into existence. It unwove itself from the fabric of the room, a knot of wrongness pulling itself into a coherent shape. What stood there was a blasphemy against geometry. It was a smooth, flowing construct of a material like polished obsidian, roughly 7 feet tall. It had no limbs, no head, no features. It was a pillar of living, silent darkness, its surface drinking the weak light, giving nothing back. It didn't stand on the floor. It hovered an inch above it, making no sound, displacing no air. It was a weeder, a pest control drone from the Garden of the Gods. And it was looking at me. I knew it, even without eyes to see. Its focus was absolute. Jack reacted first. He raised his rifle and fired a bolt of pure white-hot energy. The bolt crossed the room in an instant and struck the weeder square in its center. There was no explosion, no sound of impact. The energy was simply absorbed. It vanished into the black surface like a raindrop into a tar pit, leaving not so much as a ripple. The weeder did not react. It didn't register Jack's attack, or even Jack's existence. He was a native fungus, a predictable part of the ecosystem. I was the invasive species. It flowed toward me. Its movement was unnervingly smooth, a frictionless glide across the dusty floor. There was no intent in its advance, no anger or malice, just the simple, inexorable purpose of a janitor mopping up a spill, of an antibody neutralizing a foreign cell. I was a calculation error, a line of bad code that needed to be deleted from the system. I scrambled backwards, my corporate strategy, my grand plan to be king of the farm, dissolving into the shrieking static in my head. My back hit the shattered window frame. There was nowhere left to go. 30 stories of dead air were behind me. In front of me was a silent black janitor from the stars come to take out the trash. And I was the trash. The ultimate narcissistic injury delivered by a thing that didn't even know my name. And in that moment of absolute bankruptcy, my oldest, truest self resurfaced. A cornered predator doesn't panic. It liquidates. "Jack, the slate. Get me a secure channel to Linwood." The weeder was 10 feet away. The air around it was growing visibly colder, a fine frost beginning to bloom on the dusty floor in its path. Jack, credit to him, didn't hesitate. He was a creature of pure survival. His own life was now inextricably tied to my next move. He snatched a data slate from its cradle. "This terminal's power core, can you overload it?" I asked, my eyes never leaving the advancing shape. "From here? A cascade failure. It would take out the whole floor." "Why?" "A diversion," I breathed. A closing statement. The slate in his hands chimed. "Channel's open. It's a one-way text burst. You'll get no reply." The weeder was 5 feet away. I could feel the void of its presence, a profound null that pulled at the warmth of my body. I snatched the slate from Jack. My thumbs, slick with sweat, moved with a speed born of finality. This was the last transaction. The terms had to be perfect. To Dr. Rachel Linwood, offer. Final activation codes, location of isolated enzyme C12, vital for genome integration. Jack will deliver physical sample. Price, your complete research database, unredacted. All files pertaining to genomic repair, replication, and degradation. Upload to dead drop server X77. Now, acceptance is your only reply. I hit send. An eternity passed in seconds. Then, a small green icon appeared on the slate. A single word. Uploading. She had taken the deal. "Now," I said to Jack. He was already there, rewriting the building's ancient power systems into the terminal's core. A low, groaning hum started to build, vibrating through the floor. The weeder was close enough that I could see the absence of reflection on its perfect surface. It raised a featureless protuberance, a limb forming itself from the smooth darkness. It was reaching for me. Jack nodded to me, a curt, final gesture. "Go." I didn't need to be told twice. I scrambled sideways, away from the window, hugging the wall. Jack was already moving toward a service hatch I hadn't even noticed. He yanked it open, revealing a dark, gaping shaft filled with thick cables. With the weeder's focus entirely on my original position, I lunged for the hatch. Behind me, a blinding white flash bleached all the color from the world, followed a microsecond later by a concussive wave that threw me into the shaft. I clung to a thick, greasy cable as the office above us imploded. The roar was deafening, a physical blow that shook the entire spire. Rubble, dust, and shattered data slates rained down past us into the darkness. We vanished into the guts of the dead city, 2 ghosts escaping our own funeral. Hours later, huddled in a cramped maintenance conduit deep underground, Jack passed me a data slate. On the screen was Rachel's entire life's work. The science of creation and destruction, neatly filed and indexed. I looked at the glowing screen. I had done it. I had traded the world for a chance to save it, only to trade it back again for a book. Rachel had her daughter's life. The harvesters had their quiet, productive farm. And I had the rule book. I hadn't become a hero. I hadn't become a king. The universe had shown me my utter insignificance, and I had answered by making the most purely transactional choice I could. I had reverted to my truest nature. Not an apex predator, for I had seen the true apex. I was something quieter now, something more dangerous, a ghost in the machine, a rat in the walls of God's farmhouse. And I was holding the patent on both the seed and the plague. The market was open, and for the first time in my very long life, I was the only seller. 6 months. 6 months since our company of 2 was incorporated in fire and ruin. We operate out of a pre-collapse sub-level communications hub now, a concrete box buried so deep we can barely feel the farmer's hum. Jack, with his scavenger's genius, has jury-rigged the old server stacks into a private planetary network. He monitors the digital world. I monitor the biological one. On my main screen, I watch the bone song. It's no longer a feeling. It's a line on a graph, a complex waveform that I have learned to read like a stock market ticker. A slight dip in the carrier frequency in Sector Beta 9 precedes a period of increased aggression in the local tribes. A 3% spike in amplitude corresponds to a thickening of the veil on the sanctuary's western perimeter. The whims of the farmer have become predictable market trends, and we are the only analysts who can read the chart. We don't have to suffer the signal anymore. Jack synthesized a counter-frequency, a technological version of Ivar's moss. It broadcasts from a small device buckled to my belt, carving out a pocket of perfect, beautiful silence wherever I go. We have weaponized quiet. Jack glides into the room, silent as a ghost. He places a data slate beside me. The hydroponics yield in Sanctuary 3 has dropped by 17%, just as projected, he says, his voice a flat statement of fact. The council is panicking. Our third-party contact has just made an offer to sell them a nutrient-rich algae strain, one that will solve the problem. And our price? I ask, not looking away from my screen. Acceptable, Jack replies. They're paying a premium for a cure to a disease we invented. It's a clean, profitable loop. We are the invisible hand, guiding the market of survival. I tap a command into my console, pulling up another feed. This one is harder to get. A high-angle shot stolen from a sanctuary security camera in a recreational biodome. On the screen, Dr. Rachel Linwood is pushing a young girl on a swing. Lily. The girl's dark hair flies behind her, her legs kicking at the air. She isn't just alive. She's vibrant. The genetic decay has been halted, reversed. Rachel isn't smiling, but the haunted, desperate tension is gone from her shoulders. She looks settled. The universe without her daughter in it was one not worth saving. She made her choice. She saved it. I watch for a moment, my expression unchanged. There is no sentimentality in my gaze. I am simply an investor reviewing a past transaction. A deal was made, the asset was delivered, and the client appears satisfied. The file is closed. I switch back to the feed of the bone song. It hums along, a steady, indifferent line of script. The great, cosmic engine of the farm keeps running, oblivious to the mice in its walls. But we are no ordinary mice. We have learned to read the farmer's almanac. We know when he will plant, when he will water, and when he will harvest. My gaze drifts to the icon in the corner of my screen. A single black file, encrypted beyond even Jack's abilities to crack without my key. The complete science of human genetics, a cure for every mutation, a plague for every purity. It is the single most valuable asset on the planet. I lean back, the cool, recycled air of the bunker caressing my face. The farmer thinks he owns the field. He is mistaken. He only manages it. True ownership lies with the one who controls the seed. He has his song, but I have the source code for the entire crop. And sooner or later, even a god needs to upgrade his inventory. The question is no longer how to survive the harvest. The question is, what would a farmer pay for a seed that grows forever? It's time to start drafting a prospectus.